안녕하세요. 한국장애인문화예술원에서 주최하고 문화체육관광부와 국민체육진흥기금이 후원하는 무장애예술주간 No Limits in 서울의 필름토크에 오신 것을 환영합니다. 저는 오늘 모더레이터를 맡은 이진엽입니다. 오늘 필름토크는 내 마음 알겠어요? Do you see what I mean? 을 창작한 프로제 인스튜트의 디렉터이신 마샬 샤잘롱을 모시고 이야기 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 안녕하세요.
Hello everyone. Hi.
만나서 반갑습니다. 사실 요즘 코로나 때문에 영상 통화를 많이 하는데 언제나 어색했는데 사실 이 오늘 토크를 위해서 영상을 많이 봤거든요. 그래서 참 익숙한 느낌이 드네요.
Well, it's the second time I see you. I'm very pleased.
맞아요. 그래서 저 그러면 좀 바로 시작을 하겠습니다. 그래서 마샬, 단체 소개를 먼저 부탁드릴게요.
Yeah, so I'm the co-artistic director of Projet Institute together with Martin Chaput, who is not with us today. So we are two artistic directors. It's a French contemporary dance company. And we perform and create site-specific, immersive pieces all around the world. It's been a long time now, since year 2000. And we're very interested in how we can create performances where the audience members are basically experiencing physically what we call their body imagination, basically how they relate to the world through their senses, and how that informs and opens up, their imagination and their vision of the world.
네, 감사해요. 사실 저희가 이 토크를 준비하기 전에 잠깐 얘기 나눴을 때 흥미로웠는데 마샬이 제가 한국에서 이머시브 공연이 요즘 많은 이제 관심을 받고 있는데 마샬의 이제 단체 프로제 인스튜트가 말하는 이머시브라는 게 무엇인지를 한번 물어봤었거든요. 그래서 흥미로운 대답을 해주셔서 그거에 대해서 한번 더 들어보고 싶어요.
When we started doing immersive performances, I don't think we were using that word. It became a thing, and it became something that's been defined afterwards. But what I think it's about really the experience of the audience member again. It's how they find themselves in an environment, a very specific environment, where they're completely immersed in that environment. But it doesn't necessarily mean to be site-specific, for example, because I think you can create an immersive piece inside a theater or on stage. It's more about the connection you create with the audience member and how you relate to them. And for example, one way we really dig into that question was the scale of the performance, for example, and we are actually creating one-on-one performances, shows all the time. So this is very intimate, this is very specific, and it creates a very different environment.
네. 그러면 다음으로 이제 아마 많은 관객분들이 벌써 관람하셨을 텐데 프로젝트 인스튜트의 내 마음을 알겠어? 그 작업에 대해서 좀 이야기를 나눠볼게요. 우선 작업에 대해 소개를 부탁드리겠습니다.
So basically, we created that piece a long time ago in 2005, and it's been touring ever since. We were at the time invited by Marseille National Theatre, and they were working outside of the theatre that was undergoing renovation work at the time. So they offered us the idea. I mean, we discussed, and then we, at the time also, we were busy working with visually impaired participants in workshops, and working with a friend of ours who's blind, who's an artist, and we were really questioning that. How do we sense the city? How our body is basically all the time connected to the space, and how we can sense that. We were looking for ways of audience members being able to feel and to reach that sensation directly. So in contemporary dance, it's very usual. I mean, people are working blindfolded all the time. It's a way of rehearsing. It's a way of entering into a specific state. But we took that idea further and we said, what if it was much longer? And what if it was about just going, walking around the city and realizing what happens? So slowly the creative process started and we created the piece. And the duration, which is 2.5 hours long, was very important to us because it takes time to open up to that new environment when you can't see anymore. And it's also a way of letting people go of the site and entering into a new world, which is not a world without something, but which is actually a world that's just different. And the entire artistic process of Do You See What I Mean is really about that. It's on a certain level, I think we all have a disability because we all sense the world in a specific way, and there are things that we cannot reach for whatever reasons for our history. But that makes who we are and how we perceive the world. And I think the performance is about that, is about creating a space for people to be able to enter, to sense their way of relating to the world. So during Do You See What I Mean, it's very specific. The audience member arrives to a departure point. They don't know exactly where they're going and how the show is going to happen, and they are blindfolded, and then they are introduced to the guide that will lead them during the show. So they're led by someone they haven't seen beforehand, and they will go together for 2.5 hours through the city. They will walk through open public spaces, enter private spaces. And then there will be 2 relays, 2 moments when they will change guides. One is after sort of a long time, it's after a good hour and a half of the show. They're introduced to another person, and that person is visually impaired. And that person will guide them through a specific space for another 20 minutes or so. And then the previous guide will take the relay again. And then the final guide will be a dancer in a final space, the arrival space. And each time with these relays, the idea is really to carry on opening up the imagination of the audience member. And at the time when they basically encounter someone who's visually impaired, it's not even a surprise. It's just like, it's a very different interaction. So, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things I can say about the project, but maybe I should stop now and we can exchange more precisely about specificities.
네네, 설명 감사드리고, 이게 이야기를 듣다 보니까 사실 저도 창작자이다 보니 그 안에서 만들어진 과정, 이제 방법론들이 이제 더 궁금해지는데, 사실 지금 아주 짧게 설명을 해주셨어요. 그런데 이제 2시간 반이라는 여정이 관객에게는 그렇게 짧지 않은 시간이라고 생각을 하는데, 그리고 그 안에서 이제 누군가의 안내를 통한 경험을 했고, 또 지역 주민들의 집에 방문하거나 어떤 상점에도 방문을 했고, 그 다음에 또 시각장애인이 분이 직접 리딩도 해주셨었어요. 그리고 마지막에는 이제 움직임도 같이 했는데, 이 긴 여정 안에서 어떤 것들을 좀 쌓아가게 하려고 했었는지 좀 그런 의도가 궁금해지는 것 같아요.
Again, it's well, there are 2 different dimensions that I think the project is focusing on. One is what I introduced at the very beginning, which is that relation the body has to the space, and that porosity that we can experience, how the space is transforming us and how we are transforming the space. That's one level. I think this is going all the way through the journey. I mean, it starts from the beginning and it ends into a different space. The other space, I mean, the other area of investigation maybe is the relationship, because you need to trust someone for 2.5 hours first, And you're going to meet strangers all the way along, people you won't see, people you haven't been introduced to the way you usually are. So it's challenging on many levels, the way you usually interact with a stranger. And for us, it's also part of that imagination process, because the way you relate to someone is informing the way you relate to the space. And it creates like a creative loop that is part of the artistic process, I would say. So we both are very careful about how we put together the space, but also how we create the relationship.
그 저희가 이제 사전에 질문지에서 이야기해 주셨었는데 금방도 말씀하신 창조적인 순환, 근데 처음에 글로 봤을 때는 이해가 안 됐는데 지금 설명을 들으니까 어떤 의도를 하셨는지 이해가 되고요. 또 하나는 궁금했던 게 신체의 상상력이 어떻게 환경을 조성하는가에 대한 그 생각을 하셨다고 했는데 실제로 관객이 경험하고 나서의 어떤 피드백을 가졌는지 궁금한 것 같아요.
So, but imagination is a simple concept on a certain level, because it's how you relate to your environment with your five senses is basically where it starts, and how basically we tend to think that looking at something is a given, like I'm looking at that screen in front of me and it's giving me that image, but it's not. It's a construction. It's our brain and the memory of all the visuals we've seen and how we perceive colors and everything is just creating an image that is mine, but that is going to be very different if someone else is looking at the same thing. So sensing is a creative process. Sensing the world is a creative process. And this is body imagination on a very simple level.
그래서 이제 또 하나 궁금했던 거는 2시간 반이라는 시간 동안 이제 가이드 분들이 이제 관객들을 이끄는데 그들에게 어떤 이야기들이 혹은 어떤 워크숍을 했는지 그런 내용들이 좀 궁금한 것 같아요.
So first of all, I must say that we consider them as audience members as well. Although they're going through specific workshops beforehand, they still discover the show the day they basically guide the audience members. They discover the path, they discover the houses, they discover the entire process, basically. But beforehand, what we make sure is that first they get an understanding of what we're trying to do together. And we do that through several workshops where they basically taught how to guide a blindfolded person. So they give them tools to be completely familiar with the guiding technique that is, I think, the same all around the world. But you basically grab the elbow of your guide, and there are a few body language signs that can help navigate through an urban environment, and making sure everyone is safe. That's very important. And we just make sure that they're very confident with that guiding technique, and they experience themselves being blindfolded on the journey, I mean, during the process. And they slowly get into the understanding of what the project is about. So it's, for example, when we perform for 6 days in a city, we need 100 persons to be part of that crew. And every day it's going to be 40 different people guiding 40 different audience members.
더 궁금해지는 게 사실 처음에는 관객들이 지금 이 눈 가리고의 환경에 적응을 해야 되잖아요. 그래서 아마도 더 많은 도움이 필요했을 텐데 이게 점점 이제 공연이 진행되어 가면서 어떻게 보면 가이드들의 역할이 조금씩 작아졌는지 혹은 그게 어떤 제안을 했는지 그것도 궁금하긴 한 것 같아요.
Yeah, so again, the relationship is at the center of that question. And what we're trying to do is, although the the guide is leading the audience member, we still want to have a balanced relationship where there's no hierarchy, but it's more about being together. You're guiding me because this is the only way I'm going to be safe, but you're not 100% in charge. We are doing that together. And as the blindfolded audience member is getting used to the situation, they take more, they're getting more flexible, they're getting freer, and there are spaces where they can be on their own, not grasping the elbow of the audience member. Everything is, we just create a safe environment for that to happen, basically. But slowly the relationship evolves into something that's really balanced. And for us, it's also going back to the experience of working with people with visual impairment, and how basically sometimes when we guide them in the streets, we just want to, lead and just move people around. We manipulate them, and this is not the correct way to interact with someone. And so we just want a very balanced relationship to take place, basically.
사실 질문은 짧고 답이 길어가지고 계속 이야기를 하게 되시지만 계속 진행할게요. 아까도 말씀해 주셨는데 가이드는 40명이었고 또 이제 실제로 자기 집을 관객으로 초대한 분들이 20명이었어요. 그래서 그 분들을 어떻게 참여를 시켰고, 사실 집이라는 건 참 사적인 공간인데 어떻게 어떤 설득이 필요했는지가 궁금한 것 같아요. 사실 코로나 이 시대에 그게 가능할지 아직 모르겠지만.
Well, today's environment is not for this project, for sure, not now, because first to be guided by a stranger and everything, I think it wouldn't make sense. But anyway, in another world, a world without the pandemic, I must say, first of all, that it's different in each city we are creating the show. You don't interact with people in your house the same way in Canada, in France, in Korea, in Italy, everywhere. So first we need to make sure what's the cultural environment and how the project can fit in that new cultural environment. And then through that information, we know how to reach out to people living in specific neighborhoods and how we can go through schools, we can go through associations, we can go through all specific organizations, and we introduce the project to them during info sessions. And in most places, people are very excited. It's a bit weird and strange at first, but it's also a very fun, interesting, creative process. Because it's very simple. What we ask them to do is that, would you be ready to welcome a stranger to your place? And what would you offer that person? And how would you interact with them? And the way they answer that question is completely up to them. Although we will rehearse and prepare them, this is how it happens. So people might be willing to share a meal, might be willing watching TV together, take care of their pets, singing. Everything happens. And this is really marvelous. But I guess in some, I've been in Seoul, and I know that maybe people are not interacting with private spaces the same way. So maybe in Seoul it would be a different way of being inside a house is not very important, but being entering a private, intimate space is what it's all about. It doesn't have to be a house, but an intimate space can be found anywhere.
네. 그래서 금방 말씀해 주셨는데 다양한 도시에서 이 작업을 하셨다고 했잖아요. 그래서 다시 도시마다 어떤 것들이 다르고 흥미로웠는지가 궁금하고, 또 그런 새로운 문화에 갔을 때 도전해보고 싶었던 어떤 상점 혹은 장소들이 있었는지도 좀 궁금합니다.
Well, it's a bit difficult to explain. I think it's a letting go process, because when you arrive into a new place, you come with the experience of the previous one. So you know what you've done and things that you enjoy doing, and it's about and the process that now is about making that former project disappear and embracing the new reality that surrounds you. So it takes time, but it's a long creative process. The residency takes place like 3 months before the actual performance. So we have time to interact with people and get to know the reality that we encounter and then transform the project. And this is actually what's really fun and interesting to do. It's never the same piece. But going back to your precise question, I think the way the relationship will change drastically from one country to another, because some people are more or less comfortable with the physical contact that's taking in someone's elbow, for example. They will interact also verbally with a stranger on a very different level. So it's about getting to know how people can be comfortable on that level as soon as we can, and creating the environment for that to happen. We don't want to challenge people and force them to do something they don't want to do. We just want to transform the project so that it makes sense for them and they can actually appropriate the process. So, of course, in Italy, physical contact is not an issue. It's been very different, for example, in Vancouver, in Canada. But mainly we did it in Western countries. We workshopped, for example, in Seoul around the project, and it was interesting to see also how people relate to spaces with their body and how free they are or not. But I think it's actually very informative and it's not a difficulty for us. It's actually a new way to enter the process.
흥미로운데요. 사실 3개월이라는 시간이 짧으면 짧을 수도 있고 길면 길 수도 있다고 생각을 해요. 근데 그 3개월이라는 그 시간 동안 어떻게 그런 소통의 방법을 찾아가는지 궁금한 것 같아요. 그리고 이게 도움이 될지 모르겠지만 어떤 지역 예술가들을 만나는지 그것도 궁금합니다.
So just to be precise, the residency is not 3 months long. It's 2 weeks, and then there's a 3-month gap, and then we come back for a complete month, and then the performances are taking place. But during the 3 months, we are not on site. We are still working with the local team, basically recruiting all the volunteers for the project. And also what's important to say is that we are only 2, maximum 3 people coming from France, and the rest of the team is recruited locally. So, and we give the tools that we created for the show to a new team each time, and we transform them again each time with the new team according to their reality. I mean, again, every country has a specificity, and we need to take that into account. And also for us, it's, and then the creative process with local artists, we have we have a crew of altogether, let me count, up to 8 local artists. So there are 4 dancers and 4 writers or poets that are part of the project. And there's quite a long rehearsal time and planning that's taking place for the dancers to understand exactly what the end of the performance is about. It's not contact improvisation. It's very far from that. And it's a very interesting long process. But I think contemporary dancers share a common language all around the world, and we're all travelers. So it's easy to somehow find a common a common ground. And with writers and poets, I think it's the same. It's a creative process. We know exactly where we want to go, although the language is different. And we don't master the language each time, but we're very specific on what we're looking for, and it happens.
그리고 이제 작업에서 흥미로웠던 점이 이게 어떤 단계적으로 가는데 맨 마지막에 이제 무용수 분들하고 관객이 같이 이제 춤을 추잖아요. 그래서 그 같이 작업하는 무용수들에게는 어떤 것을 혹은 요구 혹은 어떤 걸 나누면서 관객과 어떤 경험을 만들기를 제안할까요?
Well, the way you're asking your question is very interesting because actually the answer is the opposite in a way, because we want them to let go of the idea of expecting something from the audience member. And also, we want them to also let go of the idea of being a performer because you won't be seen, you won't be clapped, and it may be very simple like this, but it's very challenging for a performer because the way you find your energy is basically also by embracing the feedback that you're given all the time. In that show, the feedback is there, but it's on a different level because it's a one-on-one interaction. So what we try to create with them is a space where they unlearn the way that they create movement and go back to the initial impulse of relating to the space, the very initial question that we ask in this project, and how space and the relationship is informing the movement. That can be like 5 minutes being completely still and not moving, as it can be running through the space. I mean, everything is possible. But then it's really about their sensitivity and how using the guiding technique vocabulary that the audience member is familiar with, they can deconstruct that interaction into something that's much freer for everyone. Because so far the audience member has been led, grabbing the elbow. What happens when that connection is not there anymore? Just as simple as that is the beginning, for example, of an interaction. So it's I really love this process. It's challenging for the performers because it's simple, and because it's simple, it's difficult because you have to get rid of all the layers that you've learned rehearsing all the projects. You need to let go of your mind and overthinking the reaction to come to the very basics of that relationship and that space. And of course, just the physicality of the audience member is very different. I mean, they can be interacting with a teenager or an elder, someone who has different capacities in terms of moving around, and that is as informing also the interaction.
네. 감사합니다. 사실 제가 가지고 있는 질문들이 너무 제 시선으로만 바라보는 것이어서 좀 단조로울 수도 있을 것 같아요. 그리고 또 하나 이제 흥미로웠던 거는 저도 이제 시각장애인 분들하고 작업을 하는데 이 작업을 이제 만들기 위해서 시각장애인 분들하고 워크숍을 통해서 이제 이 작업을 만들었는데 또 이제 공연 안에서도 시각장애인 분들하고 같이 작업을 하잖아요. 그래서 그분들하고는 어떤 작업을 역할을 주는지도 궁금해요.
That part of the project is an interesting challenge for us. Again, it's very linked to the cultural environment we're in, because disability is embraced differently in each country. It means different things for everyone, and the way people are integrated into society and the way they perceive themselves into society is the beginning. I mean, it's where we start. But basically, all around the world, people with disabilities are asked to fit in the rest of the world and to find their way and just to accommodate their difference. And it's not usually happening the other way around. So basically, they sort of, even in terms of imagination, imagining something, they also tend to relate to what they're told, maybe not what they experience, but what they're told of what is it to see something, what is it to do something that they haven't done in the past. So it's the same process in a way with the dancers. The idea is really to unlearn all of that and to go back to their own reality, and to create a space where they understand that their world is not lacking anything. It's not a world without something. Okay, they cannot see, but their world is just different. It's not minus something. And their imagination is also not minus something, it's theirs. So the challenge is actually to create a space for them to grasp that idea and to explore it as much as they can. And it's a very challenging moment because they guide each other's, but guiding a sighted person is a challenge. And some of them are afraid of doing that. They don't want they want people to be safe. And so it's overcoming fear of being in that position of a leader, which is very rare for them to have. And it's reversing the relationship they usually have with people around them. So for me, it's a great opportunity for everyone, but it's also very sensitive, and we need to to create a space where people are safe, confident, and they're not pushed into something they don't want to do. So we take time, and we listen to them, to their reaction, and slowly everyone is creating a route inside a space that we chose for them beforehand. And that creative process is very interesting. But I would say that it's actually it's an artistic process. That's what we ask them to do. So also we select these people beforehand because not everyone is keen in entering an artistic process. I mean, for obvious reasons, it's like everyone in society. But we want to make sure this is something that they are excited about, because if not, it's not going to happen. So the entire process is about, okay, well, it's the same as with going back to the relationship and the space. I'm just going to give you an example. Like when you enter a space for the first, for example, when we introduce them to the space where they will guide the audience member, we don't describe the space. Because usually when visually impaired person are arriving somewhere, they are described their environment. There, you can see this, and this is here, and this is. We don't do that. It's not playing a game with them. It's just letting them the opportunity to actually grasp and interact with that space. With that space on their own way, their own level. And it's like when we enter, everyone is entering a place for the first time. We have a feeling of a place. It's that level of interaction that we are looking for.
네. 너무 자세하고 좋은 설명 감사드립니다. 저 궁금했던, 또 이제 이 얘기를 들으다 보니 이 작업 자체가 어떤 형식은 있지만 금방 말씀하셨던 것처럼 새로운 환경, 그리고 새로운 커뮤니티, 계속 새로운 도전들을 만들어 가시는 것 같아요. 그런데 혹은 이제 새로운 환경과 새로운 커뮤니티를 하다 보면 이 공연의 형식이 조금 변화되거나 뭔가 발전하는 어떤 요소들이 생길 것 같은데, 그럴 때마다 이제 계속 바꾸는지도 사실 궁금하네요. 네.
It's a very intense project, and the planning is very precise because it's time consuming. So we plan things in advance very precisely, but inside that planning, there's a lot of space for improv and transformation. And I think it's happening at the very beginning, like how we're going to work, for example, with people opening their house in that new city. Are we changing that? Are we thinking of working in a different way? For example, we are actually exploring the idea of bringing the show to Seoul in Korea, and we already opened these questions. Like we know that in Seoul, entering private homes might be more of a challenge. So what does that mean for the project? How it transforms the project? And how the idea of interacting with someone in a private space can be created in Seoul in a different way. But we do that before we actually entered. It's the initial steps of the project, and then slowly everything is being transformed by the decision-making process we have.
사실 금방 언급하셨는데 한국에서 이제 내년이랑 내후년까지 작업을 준비하고 계획을 하고 있다고 해요. 올해 이제 코로나 때문에 준비를 못 하셨는데 내년에는 꼭 와서 작업을 할 수 있기를 바랍니다. 그렇다면 내년에 첫 와서 할 1년과 2년을 이야기하셨는데 2년간의 어떤 계획으로 진행이 될까요? 진행이 된다면?
Well, it's the very initial steps of the project. So far the discussion is about maybe next year. And we all depend on what's going to happen with COVID-19 and everything. So this is more of a question mark. I mean, I'm optimistic, but we will see. And then now we're just discussing the possibility of creating the project and again transforming it according to Korean reality. And Seoul is I came to Seoul twice, so I know a little bit the city. I mean, the city is huge. I'm not very familiar with it, but I get an understanding of how people live, walk around, and how different spaces are. So I think it would be, I'm very excited about the idea of bringing the project to South Korea and to Seoul too, because I think it could really transform it on many, many different levels. And also we've interacted with local artists. We know a bit of the contemporary dance community. It's very rich, very vibrant. So I'm really looking forward to it.
네. 마샬의 도전이 기대됩니다. 한국에서. 이제 저희 질문은 여기서 마치고 지금 이 현장에 계신 분들의 질문하고 온라인으로 유튜브로 보고 있는 분들의 질문을 한번 나눠보도록 하겠습니다. 그러면 온라인 질문지를 우선 한번 시작을 하고 다음에 또 기회를 드리도록 하겠습니다. 해외에서 질문을 해주셨는데요. 시각이 보이는 가이드들과 눈이 가려진 참가자들과 역할을 바꾸기도 하나요?
Yes, they do. During the workshops. Yes, they do.
그럼 어떤 피드백들이 나오나요? 서로 저희 같은 경우도 서로 눈을 가리고 안내했을 때 어떤 것이 불편하다, 불편하지 않다 이제 그런 워크숍을 하는데 어떤 목적으로 그런 워크숍을 했을까요?
Again, first is for them to learn that guiding technique that we discussed, and then secondly is also to experience the drastic change that it is to be led throughout the city, being blindfolded, and understand how much it takes to let go of your fears, but also trust the process of trusting someone. And basically, this is what the workshops are all about. So the feedback is very different from one individual to the other. It's again, when you learn something new, for some people it's immediate, for some others it takes more time. We just make sure on a one-on-one basis, basis that everyone is okay. And for example, if after 2 workshops someone is not completely confident, we invite them for a 3rd one, and just we want everyone to have a joyful experience. And so this is our responsibility during these workshops to make that happen. And sometimes people come, and it's very rare, but sometimes 1 or 2 persons may not make it till the end because they don't feel comfortable at the end of the day, but it's very rare.
네네. 사실 저도 이제 배우들하고 워크숍을 했을 때 눈 가리고 누군가가 이제 누군가의 이제 이 리드를 통해서 해본 적이 있는데 초반에는 제 스스로 깨달았어요. 아, 내가 이렇게 타인을 신뢰하지 않는구나. 그래서 안 믿더라고요. 타인을. 그래서 제 몸을 못 맡기더라고요. 근데 이게 계속 연습을 하다 보니까 되는 거지 처음부터 누군가를 신뢰하는 게 쉽지는 않았던 것 같아요. 혹시
Yeah, and for example, during the actual performances, we inform the guides that it takes, usually, from our experience, it takes like up to half an hour for people to let that go. And for some people, it's like that. It's immediate. They're comfortable immediately, but it takes up to half an hour, and in very extreme situations, but it happens. Some people never manage to let it go. But that's very rare. But I can remember moments when it happened. But like a half an hour is the time you understand what's happening, you relate to someone, and how you talk together, and everything is very important in that moment.
좋은 팁이네요. 그러면 여기 현장에 계신 분 혹시 질문하실 게 있을까요?
좀 흥미로운 것들이 좀 있어서 좀 질문드리고 싶은데 각 도시마다 약간 차이가 있다라고 포괄적으로 얘기해 주셨는데 좀 더 세부적으로 어떤 요인들 때문에 각 도시마다 차이가 생기는지 그런 것들을 좀 더 구체적으로 좀 듣고 싶거든요.
사실 저도 조금 추가하면 궁금했던 게 아까 이제 마샬도 서울은 큰 도시라 그랬잖아요. 사실 어느 지역을 가느냐에 따라서 너무 달라질 것 같은데 그 지금까지 돌아다녔던 도시에서도 어떤 지역들을 갖고 어떤 차이가 있는지 좀 더 궁금한 것 같아요.
Yeah, I guess it's related to your question. The two questions are related because sometimes we are meant to create the project in the city center, and sometimes we work in the suburbs. So that informs the project completely, in a very different way. For example, so that's one level. So according to the environment, according to the neighborhood, the interactions are going to be very different. Sometimes we are in very dense urban areas where walking around is already a challenge. The sound atmosphere is loud all the time, and that could be a challenge for the project too. So then our work is to make sure that during the process, the audience member walks around 3 kilometers. So it's not a long distance, but it's still a distance we can go through an area of 3 kilometers. And hopefully during these 3 kilometers, we can go through various atmospheres and ways of perceiving the environment. So that's what we are looking for. And this is more or less challenging according to where we are. Because but at the end of the day, we just let it go. And I think because the city is what it is, we don't try to set it up. We just try to create, to take on every piece of information that we find of an interest and incorporate it into the project. And going back to more specific cultural interactions, I don't know. It's a question that we asked a lot because people are curious about this. But very honestly, I don't have a very juicy anecdote to share with you. People entering homes, it's a private space, and people are very imaginative. They basically share with the audience member things that you wouldn't dare imagining beforehand in a very interesting way. And I guess from one country to another, the sort of hobby you would have home is different. When we did it in France, a lot of people decided to cook, for example, with the audience member. It would be like, well, here is my grandmother recipe of whatever, and you're going to start, doing it with me, and then the next audience member will do the next step, and then the final one maybe we'll eat it at the end of the day. So I guess the cultural environment, is informing the project there, and also during the workshops, we get to understand very precisely what it is to be with a stranger in that cultural environment, because they are workshopping with strangers, and then we kind of try to think of ways of making people comfortable, I guess, in an easy way. And workshopping in Seoul, we didn't do that project, but we did also site-specific performances where people were challenging indoor space in specific ways, like you would step up on the table, for example. And in Europe, people do that very easily. In Korea, it was more of a challenge, and the first thing people would do is to get rid of their shoes, which makes sense, but from a European perspective, maybe not as much. And that sort of small details that slowly transforms what you do. But it's never something like a big gesture or drastic transformation. It's something very subtle. Is how firmly maybe you grasp the elbow of your guide, or what sort of words you exchange as you meet. And that's okay.
오케이. 감사합니다. 그리고 혹시 또 있을까요? 질문이? 그럼 또 온라인 질문을 한 번 더 해볼게요. 또는 참여자로서는 세 번 동반하는 사람들이 비장애, 장애, 비장애인으로 변동되는 과정을 거치면서, 그리고 2시간 반이라는 시간의 축적을 통해 수동적 관객에서 주도적 또는 주체적 관객으로 변하게 되는 걸 경험하게 될 것 같아요. 마지막에 움직임을 하면서 춤을 출 때 무용수를 따라 하거나 소극적으로 행위를 하는 것이 아니라 조금 더 자유롭고 자발적인 움직임을 하는 자신을 발견하게 될 것 같아요. 시각적 결여의 상태에서 상상의 힘으로 그 부족을 자유로운 상상이 깃드는 곳으로 여길 수 있는 자신감을 얻는 거죠. 그런데 모두가 그렇지는 않을 것 같아요. 너무 길거나 무섭다고 하면서 계속 이끌어주기를 바라는 사람들도 많을 것 같고요. 관객 중에 주도적으로 이 프로그램을 즐기고 체험하는 비율이 얼마나 되나요? 그리고 그들의 감상 중에 인상적인 말들이 있었나요?
It's impossible for me to answer that question in terms of statistics. I mean, I don't know how many people are one extreme or the other, but it's true that it's going from one extreme to the other. And I have one actually funny anecdote to share with you. That's the first time when we created the project in Marseille, and one of the blindfolded audience members decided that he wanted to climb up a tree, and he was getting really wild into the idea of being free in a new environment. And of course, in terms of safety, that was impossible. But so people can go wild, or people can become, it can become very intense and very quiet. In the first city we created the piece, I was guiding the last audience member to the arrival point, and I remember guiding a lady that cried from the beginning till the end. She didn't cry because she wasn't comfortable, because she cried because the experience was deep for her on a level that I couldn't share, because it was her experience, and for me it was like also very intense to be in that relationship. So I guess, I think it's what a creative process is. It can be a very grand gesture, it can be very small, and the intensity is the same, I would say. One thing for sure is that 100% of the audience members are going through a very intense experience. Not intense in terms of being challenging, because this is not the way we created the piece. in a way, we really want people to feel comfortable, because I think this is the only way they can enter that body imagination we were discussing. But there's still a level of intensity, because you never go through the city this way. You never meet strangers this way. You never given also the generosity of strangers welcoming you into their homes. People are very generous. I mean, they're taking time for you. They prepare something for you. So it's transformative on many levels. And we just create the time and space for that, but the outcome is really to the audience member according to their history, to who they are, and what matters to them when they come across this project. But this is a very transformative experience for anyone.
네, 이야기에 빠져들었어요. 또 다른 질문이 있을까요? 이제 아마도 마지막 질문일 것 같은데. 네.
안녕하세요. 저는 그 영상제에서 9분 분량의 영상을 보고 나서 이게 이렇게 관객 참여형 공연이라는 생각을 못 해봤어요. 다만 공연을 보면서 저는 오래전부터 시각장애인 도서관에서 도서 녹음 봉사를 하면서 분기별로 저런 오리엔테이션을 했었거든요. 서울 안에서 지하철역을 건너간다던가 아니면 큰 길이 있는 그 동네를 이제 발런티어들이 옆에 활동 보조인을 두고 눈을 다 가린 상태에서 걷는다던가 하는 그런 테스트가 오리엔테이션을 하면서 이제 거기서 계속 말씀해 주시는 내용들은 믿으라는 얘기를 하시는 거예요. 앞 사람을 믿으라고. 근데 저희도 당연히 두렵지만 옆에 스태프들이 당연히 있고 활동 보조인들이 있기 때문에 어느 정도 믿을 수 있었는데 이제 저는 그 영상을 9분의 분량의 영상을 보면서 그 시각장애인 분들이 리딩하는 그 중간의 영상을 봤거든요. 근데 그럴 때는 저희는 이제 앞에 보이고 스텝이 있고 활동 보조인이기 때문에 앞이 저를 대신해서 볼 거라는 생각을 하는데 시각장애인들이 제가 이렇게 눈을 가린 상태에서 인도를 할 때에는 어떤 느낌이 들었는지 그 참여자는 어떤 감정이었는지 그게 되게 궁금해요.
Well, they know because they introduce themselves as being visually impaired. And they give their names and they say, well, this is me, I'm visually impaired, and I'm going to guide you with my stick. So they're informed beforehand. But when it happens, people are very comfortable to be in that position. And I would say it doesn't even come as a surprise. They're fine, and they know that they're going to be safe. And they immediately, I think every guide is giving the trust that they build onto the next one. So if they had like a very good guide, entering that relationship is going to be much easier. It's like a relay. So that's one thing. And then, yes, it's a beautiful moment because it's the other way around. In English, there's that expression, the blind leading the blind. This is actually, directly what's happening, but not in that, in the meaning of that actually expression. Here it's about sharing an actual perception of the world and just entering that relationship with that person in this moment. And but to give more specific examples, sometimes it's an indoor space, sometimes it's an outdoor space, but every visually impaired participant has a specific sensibility, and they sometimes, for example, I remember when we created the piece in Lyon, France, there were several huge trees on the way, and one visually impaired participant had decided to just take the moment to embrace the shape of each and every tree on the way. That simple thing. And how each shape of a tree was actually creating a story for him or for her. This is a pregnant tree. This is an old tree. This is so this yeah so and this is what happens during so the interaction is not about you being blind and me being blindfolded. It's about the two of us encountering the space in a very peculiar way.
감사합니다. 이제 마쳐야 할 시간이 왔어요. 저는 이번에 이제 마샬과 이야기를 하면서 하고 있는데 다시 상기됐던 것이 창조적인 순환이라는 언어인 것 같아요. 사실 저희가 이제 계속 공연을 하면서 관계를 맺어가는데 그거에 대해서 관계를 맺지 어떤 순환이라는 생각을 안 했었는데 이제 마샬과 이야기를 하다 보니 이런 창조적인 순환이라는 새로운 표현을 알게 되었고요. 마샬에게 너무 감사합니다. 긴 시간 너무 혼자 이야기를 많이 해주셨는데 저희는 참 듣느라 재밌었어요.
감사합니다. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.
Thank you.